What's up, my friends? I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and I know that some of you have been here since the very beginning. We've been doing this for like a year and a half as I record this episode, and that is just awesome. And in that time, I'm sure we've kind of learned each other's dance steps a little bit. You're getting a sense of how I'm coming at this. I know there are others of you who are just getting here, which is awesome, by the way. Welcome. Thank you for hanging out with me. And you're sizing it up and kind of learning how I'm coming at it or what the deal is for our conversational relationship here. But let me just reset the whole thing, big picture. What I'm going for here is a breakdown of the text. Now, usually when we study the Bible, we do so to get to a place of what do I do with it? How do I respond? What do I think? And how do I behave? But the way I wanted to build this was a little bit differently. I was hoping we could have a bigger conversation where people who are not sure that there's actually a God behind this thing, but they look at the Bible and they see a hyper influential book that has stood the test of time, that's beautifully composed with compelling characters, and it's influenced a whole bunch of people they care about, and they just want to understand the document way better, which I think is just brilliant. And I love that there's a big portion of the people listening right now who would say, yeah, that's where I'm coming from. I think that's awesome. I know that there are a bunch of other people listening right now who would say, yeah, at some level, I think there's a God behind this, and I would like to connect with that God. I would like to follow that God. Maybe some of you are even at a place where you're like, no, I really think there's a God behind this. I do think Jesus is God in the flesh, and I would like to figure out how to do the thing where I act like someone who's acknowledging Jesus as a king and really bending my whole life around this thing, really internalizing it. Well, that spectrum puts us in an interesting spot here because, the Bible is clearly structured and written in such a way that people are supposed to internalize it and have it affect how they live and how they think. It's awesome. But Jesus himself is like, hey, count the cost on the front end. Do the math, add the thing up, think hard about this. It's a big deal. And the Bible holds itself out as being from the maker and sustainer of all things, and offering a solution to the human problem from which everyone suffers. And that solution is the righteousness of God in the flesh, Jesus Christ. And that's a lot. And so understandably, the way some people are wired, they're going to take a little while and really poke at this thing. We tend to really dial in on the historical context, literary structure, cultural context, bouncing around and comparing notes and trying to catch the motifs and themes and little nuggets that might otherwise slip by to really see the beauty of the structure of this document in the context to which it was written. And when we see that, then we can better appreciate the timelessness of the document and how much it speaks to right now. But it does raise a question for us. What happens when we get to those passages that, first and foremost, are obviously narrative? We're getting another chunk of the story, and it fits in with the stuff that came before and the stuff that came after. But it is Jesus who's on screen. And so theoretically, there might be something exemplary here and there from Jesus that we could look at and we could take cues from. How do you know which is which? Well, we did an episode on that last weekend, a bonus episode with my buddy Greg, where we talked about that just a little bit. But today I bring it up because I had a very specific question that was asked by, full disclosure, a friend of mine, an age-old friend of mine who I think very highly of, named Liz Gamblin. And I'm pals with her husband. We played hockey together for a long time. And Liz, who supports the program at patreon.com/the TMBH podcast, asked this question on the Patreon post that I did over there. And that's why I caught it. I just think really highly of this family, and I thought this was a very insightful question, and I decided we should talk about it for a moment. So she asked, I have another question. Do you think any of these stories about Jesus are prescriptive for us? Like in this passage, when Jesus corrected the Pharisees, is that something he alone could do as the ultimate high priest? Or can we take from this some sort of instruction for standing up and correcting leaders? And then, tongue-in-cheekily, she says WWJD there at the end. I think that's a really thoughtful two-part question, one that I think we can also tackle really quickly here. So Liz here is referencing the beginning of Matthew chapter 15, when the elite Pharisees come up from Jerusalem and they get after Jesus for the disciples not washing their hands properly. And we've covered that very, very thoroughly. And so I think what Liz is driving at is in response to the way Jesus fires back at them. They say something hypocritical, Jesus fires right back, pointing out that hypocrisy. and says it very vigorously. And then he even cites an Old Testament passage that is a condemnatory prophecy and points it directly at them and then turns to the crowd and is like, ignore these people, they're bad leaders. So is there some kind of timeless example here in this passage for people who go to church and get to a place where they look at what a leader, a pastor maybe is doing, and they're like, that seems weird. I don't think you're teaching what the Bible says. That's screwy. Should you do this? Okay. It is not hard at all for me to imagine a pastor grabbing this passage and being like, this is how you do it when somebody is wrong. But I think things would get pretty chaotic pretty fast if every time we were sure somebody else was wrong, we went right to this nuclear level. Now, my reason for saying that is that I flip back over here and what is it? Chapter 10, right? Chapter 9, maybe? Yeah, chapter 9, where the guy with the busted up legs gets lowered through the ceiling and the religious leaders are all mad and they're like, it's blasphemy to forgive sins. And then verse 4, it says, knowing their thoughts, Jesus said. Well, right there to me is the ticket in terms of whether or not we can take Jesus' example for how he dealt with bad teachers and bad ideas and completely latch onto that, or even engage in some of the same directness and harshness that Jesus goes with. He is God in the flesh, and it looks like he knew the thoughts of his opponents, and as a result, his judgment can't be wrong. But my judgment can be wrong and is often wrong. And so I flip back over to, the beginning of chapter 7 here in the Sermon on the Mount, where it says, don't judge or you too will be judged. From the same way you judge others, you'll be judged, and da-da-da-da-da. So, okay, you look at that and you're like, we shouldn't judge at all. Only Jesus can, but he knows. But then you go a little bit further. The very next verses indicate that you do need to make value judgments to figure out who you should put your trust in or put your precious things before, your pearls, if you will. So, it gets tricky. I could see how somebody could make a case for either. But still, I go back to the key difference between us and Jesus being that he knows everything, and it is given to him to judge individuals and to judge the nations and not so much us. That does not mean, however, that people are not supposed to exercise judgment at all. In Matthew chapter 15, Jesus knows exactly what these guys are going for at the level of the heart, and he knows their teaching is just demonstrably dead wrong, that they have the whole thing backwards. So he's willing to call it out all the way to the point of saying, these guys are blind guides. So it looks to me like the 0 to 60 escalation that we see here in chapter 15 from Jesus is maybe not exemplary, but that doesn't mean that there's no protocol in the Bible for what to do when somebody's getting stuff wrong and Jesus isn't standing right there to sort it out. 3 chapters later, and we're going to go through all of this stuff in a little bit, starting in Matthew 18, verse 15, you get the very famous Matthew 18. Here's what you're supposed to do if there's a problem between people and somebody wrongs you. And I say it like all preachy like that because usually how it gets repeated, but we need to be reminded of this one all the time because this is the biblical Jesus kingdom inspired the protocol for what you do when stuff gets sideways with somebody. You go alone and in private and you try to win them over and sort the thing out and make it better. If that doesn't work, but you still think there's a legitimate gripe here and something is really wrong, then you go with somebody else. And if you win them over, great. If not, you probably need to go with the whole group and be like, you just can't do stuff like that. And then if they still won't listen, you don't hang out with them anymore as a community of faith. And that's harsh and that's difficult. It is tricky. I get that. And we'll take more time on that passage. But I just wanted to point out that literally only 3 chapters later, we get Jesus' basic instructions, at least for what people like me who can't read minds are supposed to do when it looks like somebody else is screwing stuff up or missing the point. And I would have to say that applies to leaders within a church setting as well. And then 2 Timothy something, I think it's the end of chapter 2. I'm scrambling here. Now, where is it? Oh, here it is. Verse 24. And the Lord's servant must not quarrel. Instead, he must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. Those who oppose him, he must gently instruct in the hope that God will grant them repentance, leading to a knowledge of the truth, and that they will come to their senses and escape from the trap of the devil who's taken them captive to do his will. I would think that principle would apply whether it's a leader talking to somebody who isn't a leader, or somebody who sees a leader getting things weird and sideways and needs to speak to that. So in response to your very smart, very insightful question, as usual, Liz, I'm not sure that we need Matthew chapter 15 to give us instruction, even if it might be that, and even if Jesus didn't know their thoughts and those factors didn't preclude it from being instructive, I still don't think we need it because we get all of these other much more clear instructions that are directed at people who can't read other people's minds and know their thoughts and know their hearts to give them guidance on how to interact with these things. All of that said, if a leader gets sideways in a church, is that not just a brutal situation? There isn't an easy way to navigate that. It feels like you're in a position of disloyalty and hurt, and I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of people being grouchy about a leader being an idiot at church. And so you don't want to do the thing where you go around and you feel it out with people and like, well, does it seem like this is a little bit weird or a little bit stupid? Because that feels gossipy and destructive. The truth of the matter is, when that happens, it is a delicate situation. It's difficult to navigate well, and it's pretty rare that people come out of that all feeling like, we nailed it. We got everything right at every turn. At the most basic level, in the completely hypothetical situation that you're asking about, Liz, I think the best bet is to be slavishly devoted to that stuff from Matthew 18, where Jesus himself is implicitly saying, like, yeah, y'all can't read thoughts, so here's what it's going to take for you to get it right when stuff gets sideways. And then you really do get that beautiful little verse at the end of it that I suppose will be what I close with here. One that we often associate with the power of prayer and getting what you want out of God, but I think is actually associated with God's presence with people when they are going through that incredibly difficult thing of sorting out stuff getting sideways relationally, maybe somebody else getting stuff wrong. And that is, again, I tell you that if two of you on earth agree about anything you ask for, it'll be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where two or three come together in my name, there I'm with them. And again, in context, I think that oft abused passage right there is just saying, this is difficult, and it is going to be difficult. And somehow the King will be present with you even when it doesn't seem like it. Whatever the case, friend, I really appreciate the question because it gave us a chance to talk about the whole exercise here and what we're doing together and why we're coming at it the way we're coming at it in terms of emphasis on the text as opposed to lots of me thinking through the behavioral applicable side. And I also like it because it's just a great question to think through that is inspired by the passages we've been looking at. Every now and then it's fun to go and do something a little bit different like this. I appreciate all of you. Thanks for kicking it around with me. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Yes, that is me stretching and it feels good. Let's do this again soon.